Hello, and welcome to Centering Sisters, the podcast featuring real talk for Black women by Black women. Here are your hosts, psychologist for the culture, Dr. Tiffany Monford Dent, educator for the culture, Dr. Carolyn Strong, and storyteller and healer for the culture, the Tamara Winfrey Harris.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Centering Sisters, a video cast for Black women by Black women. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Tiffany, here with my co-host, Dr. Carolyn Strong, and the Tamara Winfrey Harris. As some of you may be aware, tonight's episode, we were going to talk about toxic loyalty. However, considering the current state, the repeated state of the United States with mass shootings happening, we have decided to change the episode today and shift and have a conversation around mass shootings, including we want to address just kind of how do we address this with our children, the psychological impact for all of us, what this looks like for educators specifically within the school settings, and just in general, how do we as a community react, as well as how people are kind of looking at this as the irony of who is deciding that they're calling this political when we are asking to address this. So again, tonight, for those of you who are tuning in to our episode on toxic loyalty, we will be doing that at a different date. This will be a shortened episode because we solely want to be able to have a conversation around the mass shootings that have happened. So to kind of start, I will look at how some define mass shootings as when 4 or more people are killed. So we want to kind of come from that framework. According to CNN, there have been more than 165 mass shootings in the United States so far this year, leaving more than 180 individuals dead and 715 injured. The United States sees the most school shootings in the entire world. The widespread problem happens all across the United States, with the deadliest school shooting at this point in time, still as of May 2022, even as we are holding our breaths and being in solidarity and prayer with those in Uvalde, Texas. Currently, the largest loss of life was at Virginia Tech in 2007, which left 33 dead and 17 injured. In the past years, we have seen at this point Uvalde, Texas, where the count is 21 killed. And that happened May 24th, which was yesterday as of this recording. May 14th, as we know, Buffalo, New York, 10 killed. November 30th, Oxford, Michigan, 4 killed. April 16th, Indianapolis, Indiana, 8 killed, and that was in 2021. March 31st, 2021, Los Angeles, California, 4 killed. March 22nd, 2021, Boulder, Colorado, 10 killed. March 16th, 2021, Atlanta, Georgia, 8 killed, and that was from Al Jazeera. So this is where we are as a country. And I just want to kind of open it up. For one, I really wonder, especially because when we're talking about school shootings as happened in Uvalde, Texas, when we talk about Oxford, Michigan, where 4 students were killed and 7 others wounded at a high school there near Detroit on November 30th, 2021. When we talk about these specific incidences, how is it for educators? As you know, one of our co-hosts, Dr. Strong, is an educator. And so kind of finding out from her, and for any of you who are educators who are listening, what has this day, but also just how these, specifically in the school shooting area, how has this impacted educators?
Well, I think for me, the biggest issue that I've had um, with school tragedy in general is the way that we want to business as usual everything, and I don't know if this is an attempt to push forward or power through or whatever motivational effective for highly effective people you want to frame it. The fact of the matter is something shouldn't be pushed through. Something shouldn't be business as usual, because what you do is you normalize this behavior. And it's almost like when a little kid hurts themselves and you say, don't say nothing and look away. And if you don't say anything and you look away, then they won't think anything is wrong. And if they're not actually hurt, they'll just kind of get up and move on. And for me, sometimes that's what it feels like. It's my understanding that while after this tragedy in Texas, the school year, they said, we're going to call this school year, as they should have. There, at that point, there was really nothing else to do except, I mean, we're this close. We're days away from ending anyway. And we are calling the school year for the kids, but the teachers are still expected to report. And so my thing is, but why? Like, have you even, if you are truly asking this, then there are some other questions that need to be asked. Have you effectively cleaned the building? Because what you just experienced in this space was a massacre. And I know in some of the school spaces I've been in, it takes more than you put in a request for something to get cleaned. It takes a minute. But you mean to tell me that a massacre of this magnitude and you just are gonna be Clorox ready to go by the next day? So from a logistical standpoint, it just didn't sit well with me. And then from just a human standpoint, we're talking about a school community that lost 21 people. Why is that your expectation of me? Now, it's one thing to say the school building will be open with grief counselors if you want to come and process this in this space. But to say I have to report is it's not okay.
I just want to say one of the things is it seems like, as it related to that particular building, that they were not reporting, but the teachers in the other buildings were going to. Like, these are not their colleagues.
Right.
Like, this is not a small community where, as we know, even in bigger cities with educators, professional development trainings, having, ending up in the same space and sharing resources, your district. And so, even as it related to having grief counselors at, I think it was a community center or a gymnasium somewhere else. But it was still for those teachers, even in other school buildings, to be like, come to school. Why? Absolutely.
And do what? And teach what? And this is a fourth, fifth, sixth grade build. No, I'm sorry. 2, 3, 4, 5, or second through fifth,
Two,
or
three,
something like
four.
that.
2, 3, 4.
So so you may have families, you may have teachers that know these kids because they have the older siblings, or this is a I mean, that's how community schools work. You deal with entire families. Like I've been in the game so long that I'm to a point where I'm having second generation students, and I'm like, oh Jesus, but that's what happens in community schools. If there's more than one kid in that family, chances are you're going to touch them if you stay in one place long enough. So with that being said, okay, what about the rest of those teachers that know those kids because they have the older sibling, or if they're in the pre-K building, they have the younger sibling? And those are things that we don't think about.
I think I want one of the struggles for me, and I kind of want to find this out, and then I want to kind of ask the Tamara about something specific. But one of the struggles for me is that there is this space of honoring teachers who jump in front of students to keep them from being harmed, which as adults, you hope that adults kind of assist in protecting. But then a part of that narrative becomes this expectation that, and I want to kind of get the Tamara's take on kind of some of the responses to kind of justify not doing anything, but that some of the arguments is, yes, we laud these teachers and say, great, look, they are protecting students. But at the same time, there's this expectation of that. And then this push, continuously that kind of comes up to arm teachers. Like these are the solutions. And I'm wondering, as an educator, how do educators view these expectations of being armed, and that your role now is in this school building to be prepared to lose your life?
Was that a question for me or for Tammy? Wait, you're muted.
Like, what are teachers, that's for you, but the next one is for Tammy. I'm just kind of
okay.
What are teachers' views of this?
I mean, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag because on the one hand, I'm going to use fights because I just can't in my brain reconcile using a shooting right now. I physically and mentally cannot. So even if you look at fights, you expect people to some administrators have this expectation of teachers that you're going to get up in there and you're going to break this up, and that is kind of what you're expected to do, especially for male teachers. Like that's almost an unwritten rule. It's like if there are men in your building, when something goes down, there's an expectation that they're going to be in the middle of there, getting with it and breaking it up. And I think that while that is what you want to do, because you want to help and maintain the peace, and you want to help maintain the peace and the calmness in your building, that's just your natural inclination as an adult working with kids. It had gotten to the point for me that I'd done it so much that sometimes I had to check myself, because I would be not in a school setting and I would hear something going on between kids, and my default is, hey. And I'm like, wait, you at the grocery store. So it becomes just something that you do. And over the last couple years, it's something that I've had to consciously make an effort to be conscious about what I'm doing, because at one point it was second nature. And as you all know, I did get hurt pretty badly, kind of jumping in front of a kid. And so since then, I've had to actually think about it, because before it wasn't a thought. But when you end up blowing your C3 and your C4 in your neck and wondering if it's ever actually going to be right again, is something that you have to actively start to think about. Like, I put my body in between myself and this kid, and now I may not be okay. Well, not I put my body between these kids. And so and you do it without thinking. You do, because your instinct is to protect the children. So it's still a work in progress for me to actively have that process in my brain going, okay, you need to assess this situation before you just go charging into this situation. And unfortunately, when you look at a situation like this, you don't have time to assess anything.
I think my struggle with this is this expectation of the solution being, let's like ignore the bigger issue, and the solution being, let's have this expectation that teachers be armed and that they stop these things when they happen. And so I know that Tamara, as as all of us have kind of been bombarded with everything that's been happening around school shootings, around the school shooting, around what is the shooting in Buffalo, New York, and just kind of wondering the kind of this pretzel that people are turning themselves into. And I'm wondering from you, what have been some of the things that you have heard, these alleged solutions to this problem, when we know what are some possible things that we can do to help in this situation? What are some of the things that have stood out to you that you're hearing?
Well, the major thing that frustrates me so much when this happens, other than obviously the loss of life, which is unconscionable, is that we're okay with it. And when I say we, I don't mean we, the three of us, but we, the collective. Because if we weren't okay with it, then we would have been so disgusted after Sandy Hook that we would have taken some real action and it would never happen again. But since Sandy Hook, there have been many, many other school shootings, many, many other mass shootings. And, so the fact that some of us don't show up at the polls, the fact that we allow politicians to be so heavily funded by the NRA, the fact that, we will vote for people like Donald Trump because, hey, we need change. The fact that we allow these disingenuous conversations around the issue, as a psychologist, yes, we need better mental health supports, but the only time we ever talk about it is, when there's a school shooting. Then everybody cares about mental health. Solutions like, we need to arm all the teachers. We need more police officers in the school. We need, when that hasn't stopped some of the other some of the other shootings. There have been police officers in the school. We talk about everything and we talk around in circles without talking about the real issue of guns and how easy it is to get them and to kill people and to kill children. And we allow the disingenuousness of the same people who, 5 seconds ago were talking about fetuses being babies and protecting lives. The same people who set up a hotline in case you see a woman, trying to get an abortion, are going to ignore this issue that just resulted in the loss of a lot of young lives. And I don't understand how this can continue happening over and over again.
And I want to quote something. The African American Policy Forum, they released a statement around the mass shooting in Uvalde. And one of the things that they said, there is a clear, thorough line that connects these mass shootings and many others. The fantastical belief in individual gun ownership as the ultimate protection of liberty, a faith that is grounded in the profound insecurities of a white-dominated nation founded on racialized theft and genocidal violence. Any effort to learn about this history is a direct threat to the taken for granted dimensions of the racial order, and today's American right systematically treats it as such. They also mentioned the irony of Texas GOP Governor Greg Abbott, who created this lethal situation. There's been some memes going around, not memes, but actual reposting of his Twitter post before, where he talked about how he was upset that Texas was only second in gun ownership and sales, and that he claims to have protected school children by signing legislation banning the teaching of the 1619 Project and critical race theory, which we know is not even taught in K through 12 schools. So that was one of the things that he did, is that he said, I'm protecting. It's amazing how we define what protection looks like. And in this conversation where we are talking about protecting children, that everything is everything else. More police in schools they just need better guns in schools and more police. The schools need to be a fortress. We need to have bigger gates, and, teachers now need to be armed. That these are the solutions to this situation that are being kind of thrown out there. And then anytime you mention something else, it's politicized. You're politicizing this.
Are students able to open carry in Texas?
I don't know.
I
know now.
I have several questions.
Yes.
So we make this school a fortress. We build this wall. We make the school impenetrable. And then what do we do when the threat comes from inside? Ethan Crumbley was inside the school.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was inside the school meeting with the principal. Like, these are, some of these threats are not coming from beyond the doors. And I think the part that just kind of blows my mind the most is that this is one of the only situations where the solution to a problem is that we double down on the problem. If I go to my doctor and my doctor tells me that I am pre-diabetic, he's not going to say, you know what's going to fix that? A banana milkshake, and more sugar. If I got the hypertension, it's not going to be like, you know what you need when you leave this doctor's office? McDonald's fries. Like, if my basement is flooded and I call the plumber out, he's not going to back a truck up to my house and pour more water in the basement. Like, how is the solution to guns more guns?
Texas is a place, I just checked this. So normally you cannot carry in an educational space.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But they changed the law in 2015 in Texas to allow you, if you are licensed, to conceal carry on a college campus.
And I wonder if that was before or after. There was something that happened in Sutherland Springs, Texas in 2017. But you said that was in 2015 they gave permission?
I think 2015.
Oh, wow.
It said, I'm also looking at an article that's in the Texas Tribune that says, confronted with mass shootings, Texas Republicans have repeatedly loosened gun laws. Governor Greg Abbott and other Republican leaders signaled an openness to some gun restrictions after recent mass shootings, but in the last several years, lawmakers have eased gun laws, most notably by passing a permitless carry bill last year. So you don't even need a permit.
And I will say this, in 2019 in Dayton, Ohio, where I used to live, a gunman who was dressed in body armor opened fire in the Oregon district, which was this kind of place with restaurants and, bars and stuff. He killed 9 people. He ended up being killed. At that time, our governor said that what he was going to do is he was going to do some things to strengthen the law. However, none of that passed. And so what instead happened is there was this moderate gun reform proposals, voluntary background check if you were going to do gun sales, increasing penalties for illegal selling of firearms, the pink slip law to allow authorities, if there was somebody with substance abuse problems or whatever, to send them to a psych hospital and then they could not legally, where they could not legally have access to guns. However, what ended up passing and goes into effect, ironically, June 13th of this year in Ohio, is anyone 21 or older can carry a concealed firearm unless, again, state or federal law prohibits like felonies. And what will happen is you don't need a license anymore. You don't have to train the 8 hours of training. And on top of that now, but Black and brown people don't buy into this part. You no longer have to tell a law enforcement officer if they're pulling you over for some type of violation. You no longer have to tell them during these traffic stops that you have a concealed weapon unless they specifically ask. Because before, you had to tell them. If you didn't, then you got a misdemeanor, which it could include jail time and fines. So after this shooting in Dayton, Ohio in 2019, where 9 people died, we now have no license required, no training required, the background checks, all those things that go along with it, as long as you're 21 or older. So these are kind of the responses, like the exact opposite, like this belief that if we just let more people have guns, with less rules, that basement flooded thing, with less rules, we're going to be better. Is that how this works?
Don't look over here. You cannot have a medical marijuana card and a FOID card in Illinois. So you can't have a weed card and a firearm card in Illinois.
I'm struggling with this. And, and I think I want to just touch base on the idea of the normalization.
I want to hit this comment though first.
Okay.
We're setting up a viciously violent loop when we encourage more guns and more violence to answer the violence that plagues us. And not only that, but to provide more and more access even to those who should not get access.
Absolutely. And I think the interesting thing about that, and I want to touch on the mental health issue, and then I want to kind of talk about this normalization and what this means for our children. When it comes to the mental health issue, let's be clear. As a whole psychologist, no one cares, as Dr. Strong said, about mental health. And we know you don't care because you don't pay us well as it relates to reimbursement rates, especially for the communities that are in the most need, who are relying on either government insurance or for sliding scale fees. So we're not, for those of us who serve the most needed communities, the reimbursement rates are not great. We are required to have levels of degrees, which I totally agree with because we are dealing with people's lives, but the pay doesn't match. The debt is ridiculous. When we look at even where services are provided in kind of supporting mental health facilities and ongoing services, it's not there. So we can sit here and say we care about mental health. We don't. And as a whole mental health provider, to consistently throw this narrative that the people who are living with mental health problems are out here shooting and killing people is a disservice to people, the millions of people in the United States who are on a daily basis working to manage their mental health concerns. Well, we throw that out there. We automatically want to say it's mental health, it's mental illness, but you're not doing anything to address it.
But it's also a bit of a disingenuous argument, I think, Tiffany, because they will never say some of these people are just radicalized and they will never admit to that. Mm-hmm. But they will say mental illness as a way to cover up the fact that this person has been drenched in Fox News and, all of these really hard right and biased and really ugly sources of information for a long time. And then they want to say mental health.
And especially when we look at Buffalo, New York, as a whole psychologist who got the most updated version of our diagnostic and statistical manual, the 5th edition text revision, being a racist is not a mental health problem. There's not a code for that. It does not exist as a mental health problem. And we want to, when we choose to frame it that way, we know in this situation with Uvalde, it was an intraracial situation. The community is primarily Hispanic. The shooter, the murderer, he was Hispanic, but they're still pushing, ironically, mental health. And this shows that pretzel, because let's be clear, when it comes to Black and brown communities killing each other, because again, interracial violence is more common, we are normally thugs. We are normally just these little criminals who deserve what we got. But in this situation, suddenly you are caring about his mental health and that he should have gotten help. And that's that pretzel, because
and his immigration status.
Oh, they tried that one. That was one of the first ones. The person was like, I bet you he's illegal. I know they were hoping for that, because then they could say, this person, we got to close our borders and this solves the problem. So this pretzel of this willingness to say, I so value having access to guns, that even in a situation where I normally would say this person is a thug, this person is just this horrible person, but because we allowed this horrible person to legally get a gun based upon our lax laws, we can't do that argument. We have to instead say, well, it was mental health that we didn't know about. To twist this pretzel to, again, make what you're doing in your state okay. I'm just amazed. And I want to talk about just kind of this normalization. According to the American Psychological Association in 2019, they did a survey on stress and Gen Z. And ironically, I was reading about it yesterday. The number one fear that Gen Z has is mass shootings. That was their number one fear. And when you look at that and this idea of normalization, this belief that we are going to be okay. Like, we do these shootings, we didn't talk about, we did the balloons, resilience, and blah, blah, blah. Gen Z, who are, 15 and older at this point, they're saying that they calculate them at 15 at that point. That generation who has experienced these shootings are sitting here and saying, we're not okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's part of the argument too.
Because, in the schools back in the day, at least if you don't live in Tornado Alley, duck and cover was a joke, because nothing ever happened. It's like you would go out of your classroom, you would bend down by the locker and
talk to your friends.
Right. And talk to your friends while you were ducking and covering for that tornado that was never coming. Mm-hmm. And so even to this day, for most people, again, not the people in Tornado Alley, because they got some real trauma surrounding duck and cover. Mm-hmm. But for the rest of us that were doing it because our schools needed to check off a box, you say duck and cover now and it's still a joke. Mm-hmm. But for Gen Z, this is really happening. Mm-hmm. And it's happening, I think it's happening so much that it's not uncommon anymore. Mm-hmm. It's happening to the point that it could never happen to me is an unrealistic statement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the difference, because you're not talking about an isolated incident over there that happened 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we're just doing this drill because when it happened 10 years ago, stay ready because you don't have to get ready. Mm-hmm. That's not the situation anymore. The situation is very much, this is a reality that could happen to you and you need to be prepared.
And I think I posted something on, I think it was TikTok earlier today, is that we need to not normalize this, because when we normalize it, we act like there is nothing that we could do to make a difference. It's like you live with it because it is what it is. So we're normalizing, these drills of active shooter drills in schools. When we normalize it, we say, you know what, expect an active shooter because there's nothing we can do to keep it from happening. I remember the bulletproof backpacks, and then we're sitting here and it's like, let's normalize you coming to school with a fortress and having more police officers carrying actual guns in your school, patrolling the hallways. Let's act like that this is okay. This is life. And you wonder, for our children, what is this going to mean for them if we continue to act like this is just what it is? Because it allows those of us who are adults to not be accountable. I don't have to do anything if you're able to, have something happen, that's tragic in your school, that's a shooting, or if you're going to, for even kids who go to the grocery store and it's like, what, now we have to be nervous. We got to watch going to the grocery store. These everyday things that we're saying, we don't have to do anything. You just have to get used to it because this is the way it's going to be. And what type of trauma are we now normalizing with our children?
I mean, we see it. We see it. Like you said, these kids are stressed out, and we are having we're having to have these conversations with our kids. We're having to have these active shooter conversations and active shooter drills while at the same time dealing with another group of kids that are too young and too fragile and too innocent to talk about racism.
And I just want to kind of look at what Jennifer said. Yeah. And we're talking about when things have actually happened in the schools. But yes, the lockdowns that have happened because of threats, weapons being found on the school grounds. This is the reality for our children. And even with that fortress concept, as you had mentioned earlier, Dr. Strong, that is this, we put up something so people can't get in, but then sometimes this is happening from within the school. I know the Chardon shooter, which was here in TJ Lane, which was here in Ohio, in Northeast Ohio, where I'm at, that was a school. Like you're saying, well, someone can walk up into the school and do this. Columbine, that was their school. So like these are places where they are actually present. It's not always going to be this, I can put up a fortress, but these are people who actually at times belong in the school. And the thing that they have access to are these high powered weapons, this body armor, all of these things that we're sitting here and saying, but we can't do nothing about any of that. We can't do anything about the weapons.
And I want to make sure that people saw what LaShonda said about who suffers when there are more police in schools. Because, you have these mass shootings, but you also have, as the result of police in schools, Black girls getting pepper sprayed in the face because police are there and they escalate things to inappropriate levels when it has to do with our kids.
And the thing about schools don't know what else to do. I think the thing is that schools are also being put in a place that's unfair because you want to try to make this as safe of a learning environment as possible. The struggle is that the tools that are being sanctioned are oftentimes not necessarily providing an emotionally safe place to be. So I get it for schools where it's like, okay, if you're not going to monitor to put more checks in place for weapons, and we're able to have, like the kid in Oxford, Michigan, access, we're able to get these guns, students are able to get these guns and bring them into the school. We're going to have more resource officers and police to combat that. And yet we know that there are, as the Tamara said, consequences specifically for Black and brown folks related to when you have more police in school, like the young lady, I think it was in Wisconsin or Michigan, who the police officer, they're worried that she's going to have some permanent damage.
That was Wisconsin.
Because of it, because of this police officer now taking this protection to this to where we put them in because we're trying to help with school shootings. And now they're being used to enforce things that, as Dr. Strong said, teachers before did, but they're doing it from a level of higher engagement and possible lethality that is not what teachers do. So at times,
when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah. And I think, and that's that piece of it, is that it's not schools. Yes, you're doing the best at times you can do. There was some issues, as we talked about, with Oxford, Michigan, and what happened there. Didn't the resource officer, I think so, did run. And even
that was Florida, right? Florida.
Parkland, Florida.
Yeah.
And that was in February of 2018, where 17 students were killed, or 17 people were killed. And in this situation, one of the officers got wounded. And then the shooter went on to shoot more people. So their response was, if we had more police in there, even if they would have got shot.
I mean, schools are reacting to an unnatural situation because the government won't do what it should do. People won't do what we should do in making sure there are people in office who will handle this crisis with guns. Then schools have to take unnatural action. It's not normal to have metal detectors and armed police officers. It's not normal to be educated in a fortress.
Right.
Which kind of shows up as more of a daytime prison.
Right. I do have one more question. I know you want to get to how to talk to kids, and I did load your graphic for that. But I guess I'm going to just kind of stir the pot a little bit and ask the question of what is, if any, the responsibility of social media in this? Because what we're seeing far too often is after these situations occur, that we're checking folks' social media and they're telling you what they're going to do. Like he said, there were 3 posts, I believe. The first post was something about his grandmother had said something to him about the fact that he didn't graduate. And he was like, I'm going to shoot my grandmother. He came back on social media and said, I just shot my grandmother. Now I'm finna go shoot up a school. And then he did. So
I think if he was a Black woman who's called out white supremacy, he would have been blocked off of social media very quickly. So we know that there are things that social media sites are checking for.
Well, I don't even mean like blocked or citing,
I think that's part of it. I think where the red flags go up for those entities who are responsible for social media sites, that they are able. I mean, you run into people all the time, like I was put in Facebook jail because of this. I think the other piece of it is that social media has become this place where people just assume that people are putting stuff out there and venting. Where if these things would have been said in person, we would have taken them more seriously. I think on some level we become desensitized to some things because of social media. I think
normalization.
Right. And that people say things on there that before, if you would have said it and you had to say it in person, we would have looked at it as more serious and more powerful. So I do think that we need to, when things are posted, that there is this encouragement of reporting what you see on social media. I think, and I agree. And I think the other piece of it is that social media, the normal sites that people are using for social media interaction very clearly have people monitoring for certain words. The fact that at times you can't say white because they're going to flag you. There's these buzzwords that they're looking for. And I'm wondering, is that a piece of it too that needs to be monitored a little bit more closely? It's more important for a Black woman to call out white supremacy and you get blocked on social media than it is for someone to come on and say that they're going to shoot somebody. Or I think even wasn't the one kid in Michigan, didn't he have some posts as well that were out there?
He when he first bought the gun, he posted and he said it was a gun that he wasn't supposed to have. So his parents bought it for him. And then he posted again and said something about this is my new gun. If you have questions about it, hit my inbox. And I think that was the one that the school flagged and called his, and that's when they called his parent up the first time. And then they got the mom's text messages and she had said something about watch what you post, or no, they flagged his messages and caught him searching for ammunition during class. And that's when she texted him and said, next time, don't get caught.
Tamara, you're muted. I see your mouth and
You would
So
think by now I would know how streaming works. No, I was just in agreement going, yes, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. And and even when it came to the shooter in Buffalo, New York, he very clearly was radicalized. I mean, we like to only use that for people who are
People of color.
people of color, and specifically, we like to say that, especially we love to put that on all people who are a religion other than who are in religions other than Judeo-Christian. But yes, we know that he was also on, from what I've heard on social media, in searching for things. And again, there is this combination of the responsibility of social media sites who manage to flag when you write white. But, if you sit on here and I'm like, Dr. Strong, I'm going to knock you out. Oh, no, you violence. You're able
right.
to.
Somebody had just said you can't say kick, punch, or slap.
But you can say shoot. You can say kill my grandma.
Wow.
So I'm wondering, as we move forward, we talk about this normalization and how do we have these conversations? We need to talk about them. We need to prepare our children, because right now we know that as much as our elected officials, and we need to remember elected, keyword elected officials, say they care with all of their thoughts and prayers. I am so angry. They love to throw down. They throw in a few cuss words to show you how frustrated they are. We know they're not going to. They are so invested in not doing anything, because it's, what is the goalpost? We've had Parkland, we had Newtown, we have now Uvalde, we had Columbine, we have all these incidences for school shootings. Now we also have Buffalo, New York, and we're looking at being in the doggone grocery store. We have shootings of churches by like Dylan Roof, where he went in and he shot the people at the church. We have, and killed people at church. We have these things. There's nothing. We've had it with Black and brown folks being the victims. We have it. Chardon is a predominantly white area. We had it where things happened in the Oregon district, which was this mixture. So we have these shootings. Newtown, it can be wealthy, poor. It can be all of these things. None of that matters. And so at this point, how do we deal with and prepare and help our children cope with what is, at the same time as we don't say that this is okay? And here's some things that we want to do. Is we want to make sure that we're listening to our kids. We want to listen to their concerns. Don't dismiss them, because sometimes what we try to do in these moments of trying to make everything okay, we try to act like it's not as bad as it is. We want to be honest with them about what has happened, because a lot of times when our children come to us, they already know. They're just trying to see, can I trust my parent to let me know what's going on? Talk to them in ways that they can understand. Younger children, you want to, of course, make sure that you're talking to them in language that makes sense. Give them permission to feel whatever they feel. If they're angry, if they're scared, if they're worried, if they're frustrated, whatever it is, all of that's okay. And address their worries about their own safety. Again, Gen Z is saying this is the biggest thing for them. And now we have this next generation coming up who's experiencing their own incidences of mass shootings. We also need to be open about our own feelings. Because sometimes we try to act like things don't bother us, which then makes our kids think that this shouldn't bother them. And then we want to show them how we're trying to deal with what's happening. For some of our kids, we know that they're like, they feel like they need to do something. And so we want to find out ways that we can be helpful. Sometimes I know that they're doing things like, you can ask them if they want to send books to the children in the city. They're the second through fourth graders who are dealing with stuff. Do you want to send books there? Do you want to raise money for them? Whatever the case may be, to make them feel like they're doing something when our legislators aren't doing anything. And then, hug them, love on them, be there for them. This is devastating for grown folks. who know how the world can be. Imagine these kids who we spend our entire times trying to be as safe as possible. And, our kids, as LaShondia said, terrified to go to school. And I've heard that from parents today, from caregivers today, talking about, what do I say to my kid who didn't want to get out the car? And my thing was, tell them they ain't got to go. Don't go today. Because part of it is also this business as usual. We put this expectation on our kids. For one, we need to show our schools that this cannot be business as usual. That's not what we're going to do. And for our kids, we have to give them the space to also say, you know what, I'm scared to go today. You know what, and I'm scared too, because we know copycats happen. We do know that that's people look and they end up saying, I want to be this famous. I want to do what was done here. And so part of it is, if your kid was saying, I ain't trying to go, it's the end of the school year, don't go. And then you call the school and you let them know, my child is traumatized. My child doesn't feel safe. And maybe if we actually stop trying to do business as usual, stop trying to allow this to be normalized, then maybe at some point, the voters will get out there and say, we're not going to continue to let you hold these elected offices and make this okay. That, the world begins to say we cannot move on from this and we actually have to do something different. So this has been a not special episode, because special sounds great. This has been a necessary episode of Centering Sisters, a video cast for Black women by Black women, as we discuss mass shootings, the impact on us, the impact on our children. Vote, talk to your children. Do not normalize this. On behalf of myself, Dr. Tiffany, Dr. Strong, and the Tamara Winfrey Harris, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Be safe. Hug your children. Hug yourselves. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to leave a rating and review. For bonus content, visit Centering Sisters on Patreon. And keep in touch with us at Centering Sis on Twitter and Centering Sisters on Facebook. Got feedback or an idea for a future show? Reach out at centeringsisters@gmail.com. And remember, love Black women, support Black women, believe Black women, trust Black women. Talk to you next time.